And so to make sure that we can't interact with this weapon until this has actually run through and this has been reset, then we actually want to interact with the weapon because right now the players are interacting with it way too fast. So let's go to the weapon base, and inside of here, I'm going to make a new variable, and let's call it can be interacted with. Now let's make it just into a Boolean. Now let's go to the player base, and let's actually make it by default that you can interact with it. So if we just click on this Boolean, I am going to set it to true by default. And what we can do now is go to the player. Now, I don't want them to interact with it once we have actually found this weapon and we want to drop it. So I'm just going to drag this away. And now we have this weapon. We can now, I'm just going to double click here, and I can take from here and say can be interacted with, and we can set it to be false. Now we don't need to replicate this, and the reason is we're just running it through the server. So maybe sometimes you think, sometimes you're replicating stuff, sometimes you're not replicating stuff. What do I actually need to replicate? So if you need some variables that you're actually only using during the server functions, these do not need to be replicated. So you're setting if this can be interacted with or not. If you're only using this information inside of the server functions to do some logic and the other players don't need to know about it, you actually don't need to replicate it. However, if you want to other stuff, for example, what weapon are you equipping? If you're using it here, you can see equipped weapon type. I'm actually using it here where the client also runs the code. Now, if this is not replicated, then this will give an error for the client. However, the can be interacted with. If I use it up here, where the client is as well, I have to replicate it. But since I'm only using it in the logic of the server, then I actually don't need to replicate it. So it's like an internal thing. So you can save it now. And now I can't interact with the weapon. And down here, whenever it completes, I want to set my can be interacted with to be true. Now we need to set it before this one because remember you are deleting the variable. So before we delete the variable, we need to use it. So let's take this and say can be interacted with, and I'm going to set it to true because now we can interact with it. And then we want to delete this variable. So you don't want to make this here because you delete the variable. So this one would be invalid. So now that is deleting it. Now what we need to do, we need to go to the weapon base, and inside of here, we need to also write here that if you can't interact with it, don't do anything. So after the authority, let's drag from here. Remember, we did not replicate this variable. So if we write something here, it will give us an error. Since we are writing it after the switch has authority, so we're only using it inside of the server, then it will be fine. We don't need to replicate it. So let's take this can be interacted with, and let's make a branch. And let's say, can this be interacted with? If it can, go ahead and run the code. If it can't, I'm going to delay the code by, let's say 0.1 seconds. And then I'm going to run this again. So I keep looping through this code. I'm actually going to organize this a bit more. So essentially what I'm doing here is I keep looping through the code to make sure that I can interact with my weapon before I do some interaction code. So let me just try to organize this here. Let me push it down. So now what I'm basically saying is go ahead and take a look at and see if this can be interacted with. If it can, nice, go ahead, run the code. If it can't, I'm going to loop or delay the code by 0.1 second, and then I'm going to go back and check if this can be interacted with. So I keep looping through it, and I'm waiting for this to be true, because whenever you drop the weapon, this will be true very quickly, so you won't even notice this one. And don't worry, this is not heavy on performance because this is going to loop really quick, and it's not going to run many times because this one is going to be true very fast. So this one is actually not running many times. So don't worry about that. Let's try to click on play now and see what happens. So if I play as the terrorist, I maximize it. I loot something and I click on G. You can see I'm actually looting it instantly. And this is the problem that we have right now. If I drop the weapon really quick, I keep looting it because it's actually going here and checking if I can interact with it, even though I am the same player. So the same player dropping the weapon can interact with it. So this is something we have to fix. However, right now the code is working. We can only interact with it whenever this has run through, so we don't get any bugs from it being invisible. So let's move on to the next lesson.